Can you guys see and hear me? Okay, great. So for today's lesson, we are going to cover a Pong project. And for those of you who haven't done Scratch before or haven't started Pong yet, Pong is basically a project where we have balls and cursors, and I'll demonstrate here. So this project is going to have two modes, which is why it's going to take a little bit longer than our other projects. And what this means is today we're going to program the easy mode and a bit of the project, and then next week we're going to finish the project. So try and be here for both classes so we can do both of them. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to start with and be able to create the home screen, and we're going to program these buttons and basically program this Pong game with 2 balls and 1 paddle. So that's what we're going to be doing today. As usual, the meeting is going to be recorded by us so that we can paste it online, and the links to all of that will be in the weekly emails that we're sending out. If you're not getting those emails, again, make sure that you use the Google form and go on that, and we're going to start the project. So I want you guys all to open up to scratch.mit.edu, open up to a new project, and then type in the chat when you're ready to begin. Okay, great. So with our past projects, we've covered a lot of different aspects of Scratch. And in today's project, we're going to cover variables. So variables are a more complicated idea of Scratch. It's going to be this orange section near the bottom of the code blocks. And if you look over here, you're going to have around 4 blocks and a couple of other different settings. So variables are a worldwide programming concept, meaning whatever language you end up doing or whatever programming concept you end up learning, whatever language, whether it be Python or Scratch or Java or whatever you're learning, you're going to be using variables. And in Scratch, variables are easy to use and great to understand. So just as a quick question, how many of you guys have learned about variables before or understand the concept? It's not necessary, we're going to explain it today, but type in the chat if you have. Okay, so we have a good mix of like half and half, we'll say. Okay, so the idea of variables is imagine you want to basically hold one value. You have a container that can only hold one value. So with Scratch, what a variable is it's one item, it's one value, it's one number that can be held in a container. And then the way you remember this is you have an imaginary container, right, which holds the value. You're going to give that container a name. And then whatever name that is, it's just going to hold the value you want. So if that doesn't make that much sense yet, that's fine. So I'm going to give an example. Right now, Scratch already has the my variable. And if I drag over the first code block, what it's going to do is it's going to say set my variable to blank. So the first thing that happens is if I click on this, I'm going to click on the block itself. It's going to set the value of my variable to 0. And what this does is it creates an imaginary variable called my variable, and then it sets the value of that to 0. So right now the value of my variable is 0. And Scratch has this really cool thing where it allows you to basically show the variable on screen. So if I click on this, if you look at the playground section here, it's going to give us this little bar. And what the bar does is it has my variable, because the name of this variable that we're using is my variable. And then in orange, it's going to have a value. And in this case, the value of my variable is 0. And so the cool thing about using variables in Scratch is if I want to set this value to something like 10, I'm going to click on this box. I want you guys to look over here because this is going to basically show what the value is. Look over here, and when I click on this, it's going to change the value to 10. So when I set my variable to 10, it's going to change the value of my variable to 10. So in order to show this, make sure you guys click on the show variable button or block in order to get it to show. And then so going back to this block, if I set the value to 7 and I click on this block, what is going to show? Okay, great. So the value of the variable is going to be 7. So if I click on this, it's going to show my variable as 7. So this block, what it does is it sets the value here into 7. So just to reiterate this concept, because I know it's a big concept and we're covering it in this like third lesson. I'm gonna drag it. Okay, so what it means is a variable is a container. It's some kind of name that you're assigning a value. So it's like you're keeping a value next to you. You want to keep this number and you're giving it a name so you'll remember how to use it later. And I'm going to keep going with this concept. So the next block we have here is going to be change my variable by 1. And the idea of this is the current value of my variable, if you guys look here, is 7. And the value that my variable is holding is 7. But if I want to change the value by 1, what I'm going to do is that if I click on this block, it's going to increase by 1. 2 because I clicked twice, but if I click on this, it's going to increase by 1. So when I change my variable by 1, I'm changing the value inside of my variable by 1. So similarly, if I were to change it by 2, and I click on this block, what number will my variable have? What's going to be the value of that? Great, so it's going to be 12. And then the reason is because when I change the value of my variable, what I'm doing is I'm taking the current value of my variable, and all you have to remember about the current value is it's whatever number shows up here, because this is the number we're keeping, this is the number my variable is storing, and I'm going to change it by 2. And when I change it by 2, I increase it by 2. So by changing my variable by 2, I'm increasing the value by 2. So the question I have is, this is a little bit harder. First of all, are you guys kind of understanding the idea of a variable? Okay, so that's pretty good. Oh, by the way, if you guys have technical errors or problems with your code later on, I want you guys to contact starcoder.org assistant. She should be a participant inside of the thing that you're able to private message. So the idea of a variable, just to reiterate, so it looks like a lot of people understand, right? It's kind of the same as a variable in math. Basically, it's a letter or a name that holds the value of a number. Obviously, later on, it doesn't have to hold the value of a number, but for this project, it's just going to hold one number. And so when I change it by 2, I'm increasing it by 2. So when I click on this, it's going to increase by 2. So a question I have is, if changing by positive 2 increases by 2, how do I change it negatively? How do I turn 14 into 12? What do I need to change it by? Great, so we're going to be using negative numbers, and I think this is a decently simple concept because a lot of people are getting it. Basically, we're going to change by a positive number to increase, and then we're going to change by a negative number to decrease. So when I click on this, it's going to decrease by 2. It's going to turn into 12. So again, with every variable we have, if your project is working, it should be able to allow you to show and hide my variable. So when I click on this, it's going to show. When I click on, when I click on this, it's going to hide. So for now, I'm going to hide my variable. So the variable we're going to be using is going to be score, because if you look at this example here, I'm going to be keeping track of a score of how many times these two balls hit my paddle. And that's going to be a big part of what we're coding today. So the other thing is motion, and we talked a lot about motion in previous classes. So motion blocks are pretty easy to understand. If I have my cat move 100 steps, it's going to move 100 steps forward. If I have it move 100 steps again, it's going to keep moving forward, and again and again. So here's the thing with Scratch. We have a limited playground, we have a limited amount of space, and what that means is that my sprite is probably going to go off screen at some point. But for our project, we don't want it to go off screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a block called if on edge bounce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have move 100 steps if on edge bounce. And by the way, for this part, you guys don't need to actually copy the code. You just need to kind of watch and try and understand. So the idea of this is I'm going to put a forever loop around this. And obviously I'm going to add some weights and then see if this works. So the idea of if on edge bounce is basically saying if my sprite reaches an edge, so if my sprite reaches this edge or it hits this edge, then I'm going to have it bounce. So I think something's wrong with saving the project, so we're just going to try and ignore that for now. Okay, I'm going to pause here and try and fix this real quick. Yep, you don't need to code this part. Sorry, I'm having a couple of technical difficulties with Scratch. So what I want you guys to do while I try and log in is try and code a program with if on edge bounce. Try and use this block and then code a program. And if it manages to bounce off, I want you guys to private message me and let me see if I can share your screen. So try coding a program where it moves and it works. Okay, if it works, do you guys know how to share screen? If you do, try and take control of my screen and then I'll share your program. Yeah, so if you guys know how to share a screen, just try and request control of my screen. Okay, yeah, so right now this program is pretty simple. It's going to move 10 steps, keep it running. So it's going to move 10 steps. Can you keep running the program? Click the green flag. Yeah. So it's going to move 10 steps, and then once it reaches the edge, great, see, if you see from this demo, this is really good code, good job by the way. Once it reaches the edge, it's going to bounce off. So right now my code is actually working. I'm going to stop your share screen. So the idea of this is once it reaches an edge, it's going to bounce. So in the example that was just given, you can see that it's going to reach the edge and then it's going to flip and bounce directions. And the thing about that was it doesn't exactly show because it is, I can't remember the word, because it's moving directly left and right. But if we change the direction slightly, so if I were to change the direction slightly up or slightly down, what it's going to do is it's going to actually change directions in an interesting way. So earlier it's just moving directly left and right, and that's really good. The program is working right. But what we want to see is that once it reaches an edge, it's going to keep moving in a different direction. Once it hits the edge, it's going to move again. And as you can see from this program, it's going to actually move left and right. Okay, so the idea of this block is basically once it reaches the edge, it's going to bounce off and go in a different direction. So the next thing we're going to look at is a pretty big concept. It's going to be in an operator. So the operators, how many of you guys have used operators before? Okay, so not that many. Okay, so what's going to happen is, by the way, if you guys have questions, can you guys, again, private message starcoder.org assistant? Anyway, so with size and with the project size, so with the operators, the idea is it's going to relate to a lot of ideas in math. And one of the main operators we're going to be using is pick random. So the first thing you're going to notice about this block is it's not a normal block. It has a circle size, it's round, and it's kind of different. And the idea of this is that if you look at these blocks, some of them have the numbers, right? They have numbers that allow you to change, they allow direction, but the idea of the circle blocks is with any block I have, let's say move 10 steps, if I have this round circle, I can actually drag my operator inside of here. So I can drag move pick random 1 to 10 steps. I can drag the pick random inside of this. And now I So just to kind of show how that's going to work, I'm going to change it to 10 to 1000. So what this program is going to do, or what this code block is going to do, is it's going to pick a random number from 10 to 1000. And it's going to move that amount of steps. So the main thing to make sure of when you use a circle block, whether it be operator or not, is that when you put this in, it's going to highlight and it's going to snap together. So make sure that happens and you're not just kind of putting them next to each other. So when I click on this, it's going to move a certain amount of steps, but it's going to move differently every time because it's going to pick a random number between 10 and 1000. And then when I click on this, it's going to move that amount of steps. So if I want my cat to change, okay, let's say I want it to move a random amount. I want you guys to, first of all, try and code this block out and then type in the chat if that works and when that works. And then if you want to share screen, just take control of the screen. Okay, yeah. So this is going to pick a random number between 1 and 1000 and it works. Good job. Share my screen again. So I think you guys all get the idea of pick random. It's just picking a random number from 1 to 10 or from 10 to 1000. So the next thing we're going to have is going to be the OR operator. So if you guys have learned programming languages before, this is a pretty big concept. So in programming in general, what this is it's basically saying two different arguments and both of them need to have items. And what this basically means is we're going to have two different events. We're going to say if something happens or something happens, Then we have other things. So if you guys will remember, with our previous project, we had used the if statement a lot. We used if blank, then blank. And a great example of this is with our previous projects, we did a lot of stuff with arrow keys. So we said if key space pressed, then move 10 steps. So what this does is when I press down my space key, I'm going to one green flag clicked. When I press down my space key, I'm going to need a forever loop for this. So if I press down my space key, it's going to move 10 steps. And this is great. But sometimes I want an event to happen when two things happen. And what this means is, let's say I want to, if I click on my space button, or if I click on my up button, I want it to move 10 steps. So if I want two things to basically run the same code, and only those two things, the idea is I can use the or. So what this means is I'm going to say if something happens or something else happens, then I'm going to run this code. So with or, it's basically saying if either one of these things happens, then I'm going to run the code. So what I can do is I can say if key space pressed or key up arrow pressed, I will move 10 steps. So what do you think is going to happen if I only click my up arrow? Okay, great. So it's going to move 10 steps. So what or does is it basically says if this thing happens or this thing happens, so if either one of these things happens, it's going to execute the code. So if I only hold down my space key, if I click the green flag and I only hold down the space key, it's going to move. And if I only hold down my up arrow key, it's going to move. And then if I hold down both, which isn't necessary, but I can do, it's still going to run. So what it's saying is if either this happens or this happens, then it's going to run the code. Only one of them needs to happen in order for it to run the code. Do you guys understand this concept? Okay, so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is code a very simple project where either if my mouse is hovering over the sprite or the space key is pressed, I'm going to move 10 steps. And then once you're finished, private message me, and then I'll let's say, 2 of you share your screen. So the program question is to say if my mouse is hovering or touching the sprite or the space key is pressed, then it's going to move 10 steps. And then we kind of looked at it. Yeah, so Lily, you can share screen. So we're going to actually say the mouse pointer. So if the mouse pointer is anywhere on the sprite or the space key is pressed. So you're missing one bit of code. Other than that, it's perfect. So if you look at the sensing, the first one, so remember we're using the mouse pointer, and then with the mouse pointer, it's not a key, so it's actually going to have its own sensing button. Can you find that for me? It's going to be up in the sensing catalog. I'm going to try and annotate. The first button on the, yeah, good job. Make sure to add the move 10 steps. Okay, so that code is actually going to work perfectly. When the mouse pointer is over or the space key is on, it's going to move 10 steps. So good job, thank you for sharing. And then Andrew, I think you can share now, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wait a second for the next person to finish sharing, and then we're going to move on to the next concepts. So it looks like there's a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm sure you guys all have the code, so I'm going to actually move on to the next concept, just because we need to be able to finish part 1 today in order to get to part 2 tomorrow, next week. Okay, so for the actual project, we're going to need a couple sprites. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to code the home screen. So if I start this project, the home screen, obviously it's not finished yet because we're still on part 1. It's the main idea we're going to code today is going to be buttons. We're going to code 2 different buttons, and when I click on this, it's going to start the code. Next week, we are actually going to be able to code the hard mode and then finish the home screen, but for today, we are going to work on making the 2 buttons. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new sprite. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the bottom right here. We're going to go to choose a sprite. We're going to go over here to choose a sprite, the magnifying glass. We're going to click on this and it's going to open up the library. And we're going to scroll down a bit to go to button 2. So I'm going to click on button 2 and create a sprite. So tell me when you guys have this sprite done and you have it put in basically. Okay, great. So with our buttons, obviously we're going to have 2 buttons because we're going to have 2 modes. So the first thing we're going to do is we are actually going to create a new button. So I want you guys to create a second sprite. So it's going to be the same button. It's going to be the same sprite here, but it's only going to be a different sprite. So right now we have 2 buttons. They both look the same, but they're 2 different sprites. So I want you guys to make those and then tell me when you're ready. You can also duplicate because right now they're exactly the same. Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to do is just for kind of making it look good, making it align right. With Move the Cat, we talked a lot about the X and Y coordinates. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set both buttons, only their X, are both going to be 0. So I'm going to set this to 0, and then I'm going to set this to 0. So what happens now is I have 2 buttons that are aligned, and they're both 0. So we're going to set both of their x's to 0. That way when we look up and down, or when we look up and down, they're going to be aligned right on top of each other exactly. So I'm going to set them both to 0. And then type in the chat when you have that. Great. So what we're going to do now is because for our player, we want it to show the 2 different levels. What we're going to do is we're going to go to costumes. And then when we go to costumes for either one of the buttons, it doesn't matter which one you do first. We are going to stay in this costume. So you should have made both buttons. They should be aligned, and you should be able to view them in the Costumes tab. What we're going to do is I want you guys to watch as I do this because there's a couple of steps here. We're going to click on the text tool, and only after we click on the text tool are we going to click inside of the button and then write our text. So our text here is just going to be the word easy because it's in easy mode. And then once we've used the text tool, clicked this, selected all, we're going to change some of the settings. So I'm going to change mine to pixel and then change the color or the fill of it to black. And then what I can do is just like with last week where we covered making and creating different types of sprites, what we're going to do is we are going to make the text a bit larger and then align it into the center best we can. So make sure you have the text tool and then you've written the word easy here, and we're just going to do the same thing for the bottom button. So if you have any trouble over these steps, I'm going to demonstrate it again, and then once you're ready and you have both the text of easy and hard, type in the chat. So again, we're going to take our text, we're going to click somewhere near the middle of the button, we're going to write down the word hard. We should make sure we have pixel and then fill, but you guys can actually choose whatever settings you want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make the text a bit larger so it fits on the button, and then align it somewhere in the center. I'm actually going to make this a little bigger just so that it matches up. So once you have these two, I'm going to wait a couple minutes, and then once you have these two, type in the chat. Okay, so if you have any trouble with this, you can always go back later and type in the text. For now, the appearance of the button doesn't matter that much. We're going to move into the actual coding. So the idea of this is we are going to make sure that, first of all, it's a button. So we want to make sure that when it appears, when the green flag is clicked, it's going to show. So when green flag clicked, we're going to show the button. And this is pretty simple. So when the green flag clicked, we are going to show the button. Right now I'm coding the hard button, and I want you guys to watch the steps, so pause if you're coding these two blocks. But what we're going to do is we are going to drag this, hold, click, and drag, and we're going to drag it into the easy button. So if you're coding on the hard button, drag it into the easy button. If you're coding in the easy button, drag it into the hard button. And then the idea of this is we're duplicating this piece of code. For the actual appearance of the buttons, first of all, the Y number doesn't matter. Technically, you can put it anywhere you want on the home screen. I'm going to realign these. And then the order of easy or hard also doesn't matter as long as you make sure that when you're coding the easy mode for the easy button and then the hard mode for the hard button, which I'm going to go over in a second. So what we're doing is when I drag it over here, what I'm doing is I'm duplicating this code. So now they both have when green flag clicked, show. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, with last week, we talked a bit about broadcasts. So we're actually going to make new broadcasts. So we're going to look at when this sprite is clicked. I'm going to drag this over. This part is really important. Make sure that you're coding in the easy button right now. So when this sprite clicked, I'm going to broadcast a new message. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down and create a new message. And this part is really important. For the easy button, I'm going to broadcast a message called easy mode. Obviously, the actual name of the message doesn't matter that much as long as it has the word easy or tells you or you know that this is the easy mode. So this is going to be important later on. You guys can code these blocks for now. Because with our example, when I click on the easy button, it's going to lead to the easy ping pong game. And then when I click on the hard button, it's going to lead to the, over here, because this is part 1, not yet coded, but it's going to lead to the hard game. So the idea of this is we want to make sure that the broadcast coming from easy and the broadcast coming from hard are going to be 2 different broadcasts. So what I'm going to do is for easy mode, I'm going to broadcast easy mode. And this is just going to tell the sprites I code later on that we're playing in easy mode. And I'm also going to broadcast a second message. And this is just to make it easier. We're going to broadcast next page. So what next page is going to do is it's going to, first of all, I'm going to duplicate this for the hard button. And then when I receive next page, it's going to hide. And this is because whether the easy mode happens or the hard mode happens, both of the buttons have to disappear because both of the buttons are only for the home screen. When I broadcast next page, it's basically saying I want to hide my buttons. So for the easy mode, I'm going to switch to the hard mode, but the coding is still here. We're going to have when this sprite clicked, broadcast both easy mode and next page. We're going to have when green flag clicked, show. And then we're going to have when I receive next page, hide. For hard mode, I'm also going to drag and duplicate all of the code. So all of the code should be pretty much exactly the same. By the way, if you guys don't see the code when you drag it over, try and move the blocks because they kind of pile on top of each other. So what we're going to do is with hard mode, all of this code is going to be exactly the same, except for one thing. We're going to broadcast hard mode. So this is just to make sure that the hard mode button actually leads to the hard mode game. So I'm going to broadcast hard mode. So type in the chat if you have this code ready. I know we're going a little bit fast for this bit, but what the idea is we have the same code for both the easy and the hard buttons, except for the easy button, we broadcast easy mode. And then for the hard button, we're going to broadcast hard mode. So type in the chat when you have this done, type to me or StarCoder Assistant if you need help. Okay, so if you guys are done, if not, keep coding. If you guys are done though, when you click the green flag, what should happen is you should have these 2 buttons, and then when you click on either one of them, both of them should just disappear. So if I click on the easy button, both of them disappear. When I click on the hard button, both of them should also disappear. So that's pretty much the only thing your code should be doing right now. And then if that isn't happening, double check your code or ask for help. Okay, great. So if it's disappearing, it's working and everything should be going great. So are you guys ready to move on to the next bit? Type in the chat if you're not ready. I'm gonna wait like a couple seconds. Okay, so we don't have time to show our programs yet because I want to make sure we finish the first part today. But at the end, I will make sure that if we have extra time, you guys can show your code. So obviously, again, with the appearance of the buttons, you can change it any way you want. Someone pointed out earlier, if you guys are still coding, keep coding. But someone pointed out earlier we have button 2B. So if you do want to change like the color or the appearance of the buttons, you can do that. As long as the code stays the same, the game will work. So I'm going to move on to the paddle. So if you look at the example here, when I click easy mode, we have one paddle that we can move left and right to try and catch the balls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and paint a sprite. So last week we didn't really get into painting, but we're going to do a lot of painting for this game. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to paint. It's right above choose a sprite. And then I want you guys to watch this bit carefully again. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the rectangle tool. We're going to make sure fill is black. We're also going to make sure outline is black, or at least make sure fill and outline are just not transparent. As long as they're not transparent, as long as they don't show this thing, then it should work. So we have outline as fill and fill both as black because my paddle is black. For this bit, you guys can actually change the colors to other colors if you want. This is the part where you personalize your game, but for now I'm going to leave it black. And in order to use this rectangle tool, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down where I want my corner to be, and then I'm going to drag over to around how big I want my paddle to be. And obviously this is a really big paddle, so what I can do is I can click over one of these, and if you guys have used like images, Google Doc images, or image resizing, it should be around the same. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold on this, and it's going to let me change the size of my paddle so it's around the size I want. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to make your paddle around the size that you want your paddle to be. And I'm going to make sure that the cross here aligns with the cross here just so that the X and Y match. So the idea of making your own paddle is, first of all, you can change your own color. To make it thicker, what we're going to do is Scratch has a select tool. So it's going to be this mouse, and if I click on the mouse and then I click on my sprite, to make it thicker, what I can do is I can hold on here and I can increase the size this way. And then if I want to make it longer, I can do the same thing this way. So basically, resize your paddle to whatever size you think looks about right. Remember that the paddle is going to be the only paddle you have in this game. And then once you're done with your paddle, type in the chat. Okay, so what we're going to do with this bit is we are going to, first of all, name our paddle, and this is just for later programming. In general, it's pretty good practice to name your sprites something good, like easy button or hard button, just to make sure that when you code, you know and you remember what all of these sprites are. I know I'm not doing that a lot in these lessons, and that's just to save a little bit of time, but in general, you do want to name them. So we're going to name this paddle, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start the code of the paddle. So the first thing is I'm going to drag it somewhere down here. And the idea of this is because when I actually code and play my program, my paddle is only going to be able to move left and right. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the original position of my paddle, set it to wherever I want it to start out, and I'm going to go when I receive easy mode. And this is just because this paddle is only going to apply for the easy mode, and I'm going to say when I receive easy mode, I'm going to appear, I'm going to show, and then I'm going to go to X, Y, my current location. So what this is going to do is when I receive easy mode, it's going to show and it's going to go to the current location I want it to go to. And then the other thing I'm going to do is while you guys are programming this, make sure that you have when green flag clicked, we are going to hide. And the main reason for this is when we start the game, when I click the green flag, I want to just have my two buttons. I want to have my home screen, which is going to look something like this. And then when I have my home screen, what I want to do is I'm going to make sure that when I click on the easy button, it's going to show my paddle and it's going to be in this location. So what we've coded so far is, while you guys are coding this section, is we have our buttons, which I'm actually going to move my easy button. I'm going to move my easy button a little bit down because I think it looks better that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have easy mode, hard mode. When I click on the easy button, the paddle should appear, and this is because of this code right here. So if you have coded these bits of lines and code, type in the chat, and we're going to finish the paddle code. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we are going to actually have a forever loop. And what this loop is going to do is just like with our previous programs where we can use our arrow keys or use our mouse to move our sprite, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say if key arrow pressed. We're going to say if key left arrow pressed, because our paddle is only going to move to the left and to the right. We're going to change x by -10. And what this does, not set, make sure you use change x and not set x, because those are two very different things. When I change x by -10, I'm just going to change the x of my paddle to -10. So I'm going to see my current x is 10. When I click the green flag, easy mode, when I move my left arrow, it's going to change x by -10. It's going to decrease my x by 10. So here you can see we have a working x code. And now our left arrow key is going to be able to move our paddle to the left. And what we're going to do is we are going to duplicate this, and we're going to do the same thing for our right arrow. So for our right arrow, the main thing we need to change from left arrow to right arrow, the main thing we need to change is we're going to change x to +10, and then we're going to say if key right arrow pressed. So once you guys have these bits of code down, I want you guys to click the green flag, click the easy mode, and then make sure your paddle is able to work moving left and right. And then, by the way, while you guys are coding, if anything crashes or technical difficulties like I had earlier, you want to make sure that you're saving the project as you go. So if you're ready for this, type in the chat. Okay, great. So it looks like people are pretty much done with the paddle code. We aren't going to share screen until the end of this section. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to create another sprite. So we're going to go to choose a sprite. We're going to click on this, and then we are going to go to the ball sprite. So the ball sprite is going to be the sprite that we used for our last maze project. It's going to be the same thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on this. So now I have a ball. We're going to go to costumes, and then I want you guys to select a color. Don't delete the rest of the costumes yet, because we're going to use those. Just select a color you want for your first ball. So if you look in the example, we have two different balls with two different colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to select one of these for our first color. So select, say, blue. And then we're going to go back to the code section. So once you have this, type in the chat. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to start coding the code for the ball. So the first thing we're going to do is just like with our paddle, we're going to say when green flag clicked, hide. And this is just because we don't want a ball to be floating up when we have our home screen. So now when we click on the easy mode, we should still have our paddle, but the idea is the ball should be hidden. So type in the chat when you have these bits of code down. Okay, good. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to go into our variables. And just like from way back from the beginning of the lesson, we're going to create our first variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to click make a variable, and then our variable name is going to be score. So the score, if you look at the example here, is just going to be the score we're going to have for the game. And I'm going to pause this actually. So I'm going to name my new variable score, and then make sure it's for all sprites. And this is because when we create a variable for all sprites, it makes sure that all sprites are able to add or set or change the values. When we make it for this sprite only, it basically says that only this sprite can change values of score. So we're going to create a new variable named score. For all sprites, click OK. And then once we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to finish a lot of the ball code. So the ball code is going to be the majority of the code, and this is because the ball and the movement of the ball is pretty much the hardest part of the project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, when I receive easy mode, show. So if I click on the green flag again, click easy mode, the ball should show with the paddle. And obviously it's not going to move yet because we haven't coded anything for the ball. So type in the chat if the ball is appearing and everything is good and you're ready to move on. Okay, so it looks decently good. Again, if you guys have questions or problems, type to starcoder.org assistant or me. And what we're going to do is the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to set the value of score to 0. So right now I have my variable from the example. So what I'm going to do is make sure that when you're setting the values here, we're setting the value of score and not my variable. So when I receive easy mode, set the value of score to 0. And this is just going to make sure the value of score is going to reset every time we play. Otherwise, it's just going to get larger and larger, and that's not right. And then once we've set the value of score to 0, we're going to make sure we go to xy00. And this is just to set a starting point for my ball. Obviously, you can make the starting point anywhere. You can make them start in the corner. You can make them start in one of the sides. But I'm going to have my ball start in 0, 0. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have it point in a direction. And the reason of this is because I mentioned earlier with our code that when it points in direction 90, someone gave a really good example, it's just going to move left and right. It's just going to keep going left, turn direction, move right, turn direction, and we don't exactly want that for our ball because we want our ball to go everywhere. We want it to be able to hit the paddle. We want it to be able to move all around. So I'm going to point it in a direction, and as long as the direction isn't 0, 180, or one of the 90s, you can honestly point it in any direction you want. For me, I like pointing it somewhere around negative 35, negative 135, so I'm going to point it to the direction of negative 135. And then type in the chat when you have this in. Great. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a forever loop. And this forever loop is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to have move 10 steps. So I'm just going to have it keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. I'm going to include the if on edge bounce. So at any point, if it's on the edge, then I'm going to have it bounce. And then I'm going to say if touching paddle. So we're going to go to sensing. We're going to take the first one. We're going to drag it over, and then we're going to go if touching paddle. And then the idea of this is because I want to say, if I look in my example, if my balls hit the paddle, I'm going to increase my score by 1. So I'm going to say if touching paddle. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to point my direction. So I'm going to take the point in direction. And then now we're going to use something that we learned earlier, which is going to be pick random in the operators. We're going to go to pick random 1 to 10, but instead of using 1 to 10, we're going to change the direction from 1 to 10 to negative 80 to positive 80. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow the ball to basically go off in a random direction once it touches the paddle. And the way you can see this is because once it hits the paddle, it's going to go off in a different direction. So it's just going to randomly go off in a different direction. So the paddle, just to remind you guys, the paddle is going to be this, and the reason we named our sprite to paddle is just because that way we could say if touching paddle. So whatever you named your paddle is going to be whatever you put here. So if touching paddle, point in direction negative 80 to 180. So if you look at your code right now, if you move your paddle around, use your arrow keys, which isn't working right now. If you use your paddle and you move around your arrow keys, what it's going to do is the ball is going to continually move and then turn direction randomly to hit the paddle. So I'm going to pause here, and then if you guys have this and your ball is basically moving around, type it in the chat. So the other thing we're going to do is, if this is working, what should be happening is you click the green flag, easy mode, and then you're able to move your paddle around and your ball is working. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go to our variables, and then we're going to go to change my variable by 1. But instead of changing my variable, this part is really important. Make sure you're changing the value of score by 1. So what this is going to do is, just by adding this one block, we're basically going to say, once my ball hits my paddle, score is going to increase by 1. And that is obviously a very big score. So let me see what's going wrong. Oh, sorry. I put it in the wrong location. So what we're going to do is we are going to say, one. So the paddle code is still exactly the same. The easy button code is exactly the same. And I'm going to go back and share my screen. And basically the idea of this is, when you click on the green flag and you click the easy mode, whenever the ball hits my paddle, score is going to increase by 1. And then the button should be working, everything should be working. So type in the chat if that is working. For now, don't share your screen, guys. I'm going to wait until the very end. And then if we don't have time this week, we're actually going to be able to share the final project next week. So the next thing we're going to do is we are actually going to duplicate balls. So I'm going to click the duplicate button. And then once I click the duplicate button, we're going to have a second ball. So the ball code I'm going to leave up here just in case you guys haven't finished that yet. It's right here. And then for our second ball, ball 2, the code is actually going to be pretty much exactly the same, except for one thing. I'm going to change my costume to a different color. This part doesn't matter. You guys can change it to whatever color you want. And then I'm actually going to point the direction slightly different. I'm going to change it to something like -165. And this is just because I want them to start at the same time. So in order to duplicate the ball again, you're going to right click and then you're going to click the duplicate button. So that should be able to work. So right now, when you click the green flag, you should be able to click the easy button, and then both of the balls should be able to move around and do various things. So type in the chat if that's working. And then your score should be increasing by 1 every time either one of the ball hits, and if not, make sure that your score is inside if touching paddle. So the final thing we're going to do is we are actually going to paint one more sprite for this part of the game. What we're going to do is we are going to paint. Again, duplicating the ball is you click on this, you right click, and then you click duplicate. So we're going to paint another thing. We're going to do the exact same thing we did for the paddle, where we have our square rectangle. We're going to have fill and outline. We're going to click down, drag, and then leave it here. And what this should do is it should create a rather large sprite. And what I'm going to do with this sprite is I'm actually going to drag it down. I'm going to move this up here so that this aligns. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it down to the bottom, make sure that it's not touching paddle. So if the floor is touching the paddle, then what you want to do is you either want to make the floor thinner, or what you want to do is you want to make sure you change the location of paddle. You want to change the location of where the paddle starts. But for now, it looks good. So what you're going to do is you're going to make sure the floor is not touching the paddle, and then you're just going to create a sprite so that it's basically the floor. So we ran a little bit long with this game, and what we're going to do is actually next week we're going to finish coding the floor, and we're also going to finish creating the hard mode. So next week is just going to be finishing up this program. And then if you guys want to stay a little bit longer, if you need help, I will be here. But otherwise, we're going to finish coding the floor. We're going to code the rest of the game and the hard mode, and we're just going to finish up this project next week.